Distinct pleasure to introduce Unexpired Pleasures, a 20-minute film by Lehni Lamide Davies and Shona Hamilton. Unexpired Pleasures was commissioned by Sex with Cancer. As part of our work, we realized if we were starting to have a conversation with audiences about sex and intimacy and illness, we couldn't just have a sex toy shop. We couldn't just have answers to questions. We needed to have some stories. We really needed to find, commission, and support some really amazing artworks that could allow audience members to really feel like they could see themselves in stories. Think about where they aligned with different commissioned artwork, where they disagreed, where they were challenged, etc. So one of them, and I am blown away by this artwork, and I hope you will be too, was created by Lehni Lamide Davies and Shona Hamilton, who worked with 6 people from all over the UK to highlight some really unexpected and usually undervalued or unheard voices and stories. So I won't say too much because I think that the film really, really speaks for itself. Please join me in welcoming Unexpired Pleasures.
I remember the freedom of twerking and shirking, my scar-free thunder thighs erupting. And now I long for curious meanders down the corridors and crevices of my post-cancer intimate desires. Opening, expanding, rushing, releasing, unblocking, release. I desire spontaneous, erotic, magical moments with my partner where we playfully recover and rediscover us. Me, him, we, us. All parts of us consumed with nothing left over. That desire is within me.
I've been thinking about like pre-cancer and post-cancer, and I think I am a much happier person post-cancer. I'm not having sex with anyone, but I feel I have enormous desire, and I feel I channel that in ways that bring me more happiness than some of the relationships I've been in.
I feel like I'm learning what my body is and what pleasure is, as if it's the very beginning of that, because it's really changed for me.
Sexually, I haven't been with anyone. I haven't been naked with anyone. And I'm really nervous about that prospect, because I think suddenly having a mastectomy and losing one breast, there's a sense of a loss of what makes me a woman. And there's a sense of feeling ugly, and that actually that your body might cause offense.
I've just not been able to achieve an orgasm. There's certain sensations, it's just not as it was before the surgery. And I'm quite devastated by it because I feel like it's part of my identity as being a lesbian.
I feel I lost parts of my identity as a woman. I lost the desire I had, like, in intimacy. I think it's definitely less. بتذكر لما القصص كانت أبسط. بتذكر لما البقاء ما كان هو الهم. لما القلق كان أخف بكم درجة. عندي حنين لأنه يغمرني الحب. بدي أرجع أكتشف حالي مع حدا شايفني. بدي يكون عندي القدرة أنبسط بالأشياء بغض النظر عن بكرة. أخذ اللي برد الروح وأعطي بالمقابل.
The moments I feel sexual desire are fewer, but they're very potent. They're like really like, I need it now. And it wasn't until recently, I was like, oh yeah, masturbation.
Yeah, I want to masturbate all the time. Like morning, noon, night. And I think the more you do it, the more you awaken something, and then the more you want to do it. I think I suppressed for a long time when I was married.
The thing that I remember, I forgot about this, is this, which is the bullet. And I remember that the bullet gave me a lot of pleasure before. I love the fact that I can use it, but also that it's something that I think that my husband can also play with and feel like kind of a sense of fun with.
The joy and the pleasure that I get post-cancer in things, like when we went first in lockdown, photographing the light on the flowers in Hyde Park, the level of desire and joy was like I was going to burst. I didn't know what to do with myself. So it's very much about my pleasure in looking at things now or experiencing things in a very, very different way.
I used to enjoy having an orgasm to go to sleep with, and in the morning used to start the day with one, and you know, it was quite a big thing in my life before the surgery.
I think I'm noticing probably now more than before that I can get to sexually a good place. I can try things out, I can explore, probably not in the same way I did before.
I just feel like we need to think differently about what pleasure is and how it manifests itself and how you get there and all the things that you can do to have pleasure. So that's the kind of journey that we're on at the moment, my partner and I, is trying to experiment and find new things.
What do I hope for? To be able to refine myself again, to be able to refine part of me again that's missing, to unlock it almost. I feel like it's still there, but it's just locked away from me at the moment. And it's about finding the right key to unlocking it, I think.
Our relationship was in its infancy anyway when I was diagnosed. So in a way, we've been constantly changing and shifting and adjusting our sexuality. And actually, we've been playing a lot with other things and just kind of that elongation of what you might call foreplay, but actually it's just so much more an integral part of pleasure and a very fulfilling part of pleasure.
I'm surprised at how similar and interchangeable the words scarred, scared, and sacred are. I remember being too young to forgive myself for my body's betrayal. I remember the self-destruction. I remember gaining control, but controlling too much, making myself invisible, untouchable, closing myself off to intimacy and love. I remember the loneliness. I want to love and be loved. I think the process of actually having to have a year living with a completely flat chest on one side and the scar helped me to think about just reclaiming this body as it is now and starting to love this body and not feel ashamed of this body and think of it as something still beautiful and still sexual.
One of the things I've discovered, which I really wasn't sure of at the beginning, was I love my body and I'm happy being naked and I'm happy being kissed on my scars. in many ways, I'm really proud of my body. And I don't think I could have predicted that at the beginning of this whole journey, that I would come out of this loving my body.
I have a lot of internalized ageism. And so there's an embarrassment around being a sexual being as a woman in her 60s. I don't know where I would be like if I hadn't had cancer and the mastectomies and all that business. But I feel there's a level of shame.
I am many things, not just the body and the face that you see. I do not want to hide the woman that I am anymore. Girl, daughter, mother, teacher, lover, cancer survivor. I want to stand naked and truly be seen, scarred, scared, and sacred.
As I'm now starting to try and research into kind of a sense of sexual self in cancer survivorship, what I'm realizing is it's such a taboo subject that people don't talk about it. They don't research about it. My oncologists didn't mention it. I remember having this very, very, traditional British white male oncologist. I could see the form that he was going through, and he ticked each box as he was explaining hair loss and blah, blah, blah. And then there was a box that said libido or sexual function or something, and he skipped it. He couldn't even say it. He skipped to the next one and didn't even tick that box.
I had this incredible woman, and she said to me, look, this is going to affect you sexually because it's on your groin. That's where the wound is. One of the things I would recommend is that you use a dilator, and that every single day you use a dilator in the morning and the night to make sure that you expand your vaginal area, because otherwise it can close up.
I think the menopause puts you in that box even more as a non-sexual being. And the acceptance of, yeah, well, we don't have sex anymore, or I don't really want it anymore. And I think that's really sad. And actually, I do want it.
When I started swimming again after the mastectomy, when I started the cold water swimming, the shock of being in cold water was so invigorating, but also like being within such a kind of live element was also like a positive shock to my body. It was so positive that it really kind of took me out of like, dark spaces, I think.
I think just the psychological bullshit that comes with cancer is just immense. So when I have times where my thoughts are rambling and there's no clear distinction, it can go from hating myself, being a failure, and all of those things. I go out for a walk along the river and just try and clear my mind of those thoughts. Water so still, it casts your reflection. What do I see on closer inspection? A surface that's calm, tranquil and serene, whilst underneath in the depths I longingly scream, aching to feel that roar, that rush, that gush, that torrent of affection, worried that my scars will cause their rejection. What do you see when you catch your reflection?
I'll tell you what I find interesting for me about these photographs is that I feel they're really me 100%, because I feel there's a part of me that is very hidden and wants to hide, and yet I really want to be part of the world. And I feel this dichotomy is my whole life. And I think it's so fascinating that they're obliterating my face. And it's almost like, this is my desire. What is obliterating my face is my desire.
All through my treatment, my partner always touched me, and we had lots and lots of skin-on-skin contact, even when we couldn't do anything more sexually. I've always felt intimacy all through my treatment, and I feel like that's so important to who you are as a person.
Beforehand, my pleasure was focused not just on me, but also the woman I was with. Their pleasure often influence my pleasure. And when you touch another woman, then you know how to touch yourself, and you sort of know what that other woman's feeling. It sort of emphasizes your pleasure, and it's like almost like a feedback in a way, isn't it?
I've had this philosophy a long time, like sex should be about what it is for each individual, right? So everyone has a different thing. And sometimes sex is about intimacy and love and connection. And sometimes it's about having like crazy orgasms. Sometimes it's about coming together. Sometimes it's just about having your own pleasure. So I feel like it could be all these things, you know, it could be also very healing.
I remember really vividly the first orgasm I had after treatment had finished. We were having oral sex and I had an orgasm, and then I just like burst into tears. It was just so emotional because I just wasn't, I hadn't known that I was going to be able to feel that again. And it was just such a relief to me that my body had that capability. It was such a relief.
Loss is a portal into something else. For me, it's a portal into a more joyful existence. And I feel so happy that I can say that.
I'm letting go of shame. And maybe in the pleasing of myself, I will start to love my body more. This body, you know, this damaged body. But it doesn't mean that it's not beautiful. It doesn't mean it can't be loved.
I feel two very contradicting things. I feel it's very strong, and I feel it's very fragile because it's been bruised and needs taking care of and holding, and yeah.
I'd like somebody else to maybe see what I'm going through and not feel alone if they're going through it too. Or maybe just to start talking about and normalizing women's desire and pleasure. And for the time I've got left, I don't want that to be orgasm free, not a chance.
And I want to have sex, and I want to kind of experience being alive and feeling womanly and feeling confident and feeling beautiful.
In Vegas, you whisper, "I love you," for the first time, after we both said, "I do." In Lisbon, our naked bodies lay entwined. The ocean and our futures stretch out before us. In the heat of Caribbean Monteria, I try to ignore the lump which threatens our happiness. We embrace in our Clerkenwell kitchen. I cry tears of fear for the mountain before me. My body is bald, raw, round, ravaged by chemo. You are constant. Your skin-stroking steady embraces melt away my pain. The surgeon draws on my body with a Sharpie. These are the parts she will cut away. I wake and for the first time catch the fear in your eyes. I push your hot hands away as heat surges through my body. I crave cool cloth. We are tentative, hopeful, fumbling, laughing. Tears fall as my body remembers how to feel pleasure. I dance. My body, with its fleshy arrangements, has to learn everything anew. I am beautiful. Your dark hands caress my pale scars. What's missing is no longer missing.
I'm so happy that we get to see that on a screen, the way it's really meant to be seen. I'm not sure if Lenny's here. Lenny, are you here?
I am.
Hi, Lenny.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not on video. It doesn't allow me to turn it on. I'm going to try again. The host has stopped it, so the host has to put me on video again.
We want to see you. Oh yeah.
Okay, great. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Lehni Lamide Davies. One of the magnificent filmmakers behind this, and Lehni, I was very moved all over again watching it. I've seen it probably 6 or 7 times now, and I'm still seeing new things and really tremendously moved by your and Shona's work. So I wanted to just start. We just have half hour, 40 minutes just to talk through some things. And I was hoping to ask you to start by talking a little bit about your process with the women that you worked with. What was that like? How did we get here? But yeah, thought I would ask you to first start talking about your process, and then we can take some questions, and I can think of some things I'd like to talk to you about now, having watched it for the 6th or 7th time, but still tremendously moved. So.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. And hello to everyone. It's strange to call in from London. Greetings from London. So process. Yeah, I think the process began the process began really when you and I had a conversation about pre-COVID, 3 years ago. And we were talking about sex and sort of sexual pleasure as people who live with cancer, and how we sort of reclaim that, or how we investigate and open that up, and how there's a myriad of questions that came up, and it sat with me for quite a while. And then when you put a call out for artists to submit, Shona Hamilton, who I made the film with, and we collaborate on participatory and collaborative filmmaking. We're already thinking about doing a project around women and aging and sexual pleasure. And so as we approached you and put our proposal together, we thought, well, for us, it's a sort of creative inquiry. Like, we want to approach this project as a creative inquiry. We want to engage with women of all different backgrounds to look at this idea of aging and illness and sexual pleasure, and how we navigate and move through those spaces of ourselves and with each other. And so when we received that we got the funding, we were really excited, because now we could really embark in having these initial conversations for the idea initially was a larger film project around women and aging and sexual pleasure. And then we put the call out, and we had an incredible amount of people, probably about 60 women who got in touch from all over the world, to have this conversation with us, from all different backgrounds, aging from probably early to late 30s till about 70 years old. And we ended up having the month of April, I'm just looking at my notes just to remember, month of April, we had 8 Zoom. Obviously, this is coming out of the lockdown in the UK, and lots of other places in the world were going through lockdown or some limited form of movement at the time. So it was all on Zoom. And we decided, Shona and I sort of designed that we were going to have a month of workshops, pretty much almost like 3 or 4 times a week, online, having conversations with small groups of women who mostly had never met each other before. And what happened in those hour-and-a-half Zoom workshops, that always ended up being 2 hours, because people just wanted to talk and and in the end, we just facilitated conversations. But we started with the central questions, which is, what is our relationship with sex and pleasure as we confront illness or aging at the time, and what does it mean to live changed and fulfilling lives as we live with illness? And that just opened up this, so many people wanted to have this conversation. And then through it, we realized very quickly that I'd say about 60% of the women who were on the call were dealing with illness, and that was something that was really important for them, either of themselves or with their partners. And so as Shona and I started to listen to the interviews and the conversations and the workshops, we found that what we wanted to do was actually at this stage have conversations around living with illness and living with cancer. And for me, and Shona and I grappled with how we tell the story, and decided that my story should also be as sort of the provocation, as being part of this community of women, because in the workshops I was the main facilitator, and there's a lot of trust that was built up. So we reached out to a group of women, and several of them, the women that are in the film, I will mention their names: Ruby, Carmel, Dia, Victoria, and Sarah. Wanted to be in the film, and we made it very clear that it was a collaborative project. And so for them, they were like, okay, it's collaborative, but we want you definitely to sort of frame it. We want you to sort of deal with the beauty of it, because we want to be seen, we want to be part of something that's beautiful, but we also want to have our stories told. And so we worked very collaboratively with them, and at that point we could start to go out again. So we started going to their homes and spending a whole day with them, and shooting and having tea and spending time, and inviting them to get as comfortable as they wanted to get with us. And prior to those meetings, we'd send them a list of questions that we sort of created with them. Actually, we culled a series of questions with them, and really looking at things like thematically about safety and home and body positive, and where we feel shame and guilt, and looking at the home space as a place to explore that and have those as sort of the containers for those conversations. And so we did that, and there was all individual, and then we felt like there was something about bringing them together and making an art piece within an art piece. So we reached out to one of the women who'd come before, who was based in Berlin, who'd come to one of the workshops, Natalie Delwahens, who's a tantric poet and facilitator, and does a lot of stuff around sex positive work, and she was just in her 60s, amazing. And so we basically asked if she would lead a workshop, a poetry workshop with the women, and they all came together online and did this poetry workshop, which is the first time they ever sat in a space with each other and shared these stories with each other. And then from that we got them, they created poems, and they went off and spent a few weeks creating poems, and then we went back and shot the poems, and then we worked with a sound designer and composer to weave them into the stories, and spent a couple of the summer editing, Shona and I editing this together, and made the film. And it's really amazing because all the women take a lot of ownership of the film. They're very, very much part of it. They've got relationships now on Instagram, and hoping to all meet in person at some point, hopefully May this year, which will be a year from principal photography.
Amazing.
I
Amazing.
hope that takes you through the story.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. And I'm curious if there's any specific techniques that you and Shona used to engender trust or a feeling of safety, if there's anything in particular that you do, if you felt like just an illness connection between these women kind of like already got them there. I don't know if there were certain things that you did, or how that worked.
I think one of the things we did is, I'm part of my own practice is storytelling is a lot of my practice. So I think some of it was prior to meeting, we sent questions out to women, which were provocations for storytelling. So it was actually just bringing objects or bringing huge, and it could be as random as possible. So we didn't want it to be too serious as we came to these conversations. And I think that sort of disarmed people in a positive way, where they felt like they could come into a space and feel like there's a lightness to it, even though we were going to explore quite, at times, quite heavy topics, and there was all sorts of objects that came into the space, from very interesting phallic objects to food and pictures of dogs and all kinds of things. And I think that invited them to tell stories, and I started them off with my stories, and often I would choose an object that was quite random at times or quite metaphorical. And I think that was, Shona as a witness was saying that's the thing that got them in the space, because the initial workshops. And then for the second tier, which is when we cast the women, we'd ask the women to explore avatars, because we're online all the time. And I think think last year everyone had the game of what would your avatar be, online. And so we asked them to explore that and think about that in terms of in terms of their relationship to sexual pleasure or their relationship to their body. And so these avatars came, and they were quite mythical and quite metaphorical and quite playful. And that again was an initial starting point to having these conversations with them, because in their home spaces they became these avatars, and then underneath those avatars or through those avatars they felt comfortable in speaking about their stories. So as the time went on, the avatars were just part of them. They were sort of there, but it was them telling their stories. So I think this idea of playfulness, returning to a permission to play and creating a permissive space, for me and for Shona, we discovered it was an idea, and it was something that we played with and tried and actually seemed to be working. And actually in the feedback, because we got feedback forms, we got people to send us some feedback, and a lot of it was that invitation. The invitation, it was all in the invitation. And I think, and again, working with Natalie, the poet, we helped her design the workshop. She was really scared of doing this workshop, and she did it, and she was amazing. But we designed the workshop, and we looked a lot at keeping it playful and looking at archetypes. And so again, archetypes came into it. And I think there's something around archetypes, play and metaphor that allows people in, and also opens up subconsciously some other things that people may not talk about in an everyday. But I also think things like objects can be quite a release to look at, and it also helps people to hold on to something. So I think it's moving away from the directed question and more around the way into the question. And then lastly, I think the other thing that really engendered trust was asking them, what is the third question? So we had this 2 questions, but what is the third question? And so each woman had a third question, and that was their question. That and a lot of it, when I culled it together, I would say it was, what would you want this film? What do you want this film that we're making together to say and to convey? And literally, everyone said that in their own words, the same thing. And so pulling it together, it was something, and then checking back with people and saying, is this right? Is this the question you're asking? And so you hear them towards the end of the film in the way it's edited. I mean, it's all through the film, but you can see that there's this sort of testament of what they wanted to say, or sometimes it's in the poem, with a piece that Ruby says, which is very much around, loss as a portal, looking at loss as a portal to something else, and this loss of self, supposed loss of self through this experience of now being a 65-year-old woman with, who's lived with cancer, but actually that's opened up a different sense of herself, or Carmel talking about what's missing is no longer missing, and that for us being kind of the holding statement of the film a lot. So yeah,
absolutely.
That's the approach.
I mean, it's you give such a master class in facilitating, and it's really helpful to hear that and reminded of those things, that play is important, that objects, that thinking through an object. Just since we've been here, I see in our audience a sex educator who really uses cards to start telling stories about pictures, about bodies, and those things about just actually something goes in between us to start the conversation. Because if we just sit here together and we look at each other very seriously and we say, let's have a very serious conversation about sex in our vulnerable bodies right now, you're never gonna get off the ground. And so actually all of those methodologies that you just talked about, really critical to getting people off the ground, to having difficult conversations, having vulnerable conversations, and that really classic facilitation kind of moment about saying I'm giving you 2 questions, and there's a third question that's kind of an open question, is so much better than just saying what a lot of people do, which is, let's just talk about anything, which can also be so intimidating, particularly for people that have been thinking in their own brain about something for 6 months, a year, 5 years, that they've never gotten a chance to articulate. Giving them some good key anchors to then move away from is really exciting. I wanted to get a question or 2 from the audience, if there happened to be, but I wanted to tell them that I was going to ask them for questions so they can give a moment if they think of anything. But I wanted to ask you about stories and storytelling, and you talked about yourself as a storyteller. And I'm curious if there were particular cancer stories that you and Shona or the people that you worked with were either running towards or running away from or running side by side with, kind of cancer stories that we see, know, or hear, whether they were helpful or hurtful. I don't know if that's something that you could reflect on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the cancer stories were very present in, and very often, I think when I talk about the invitation, it was like, it was an invitation to sit with the story rather than to always to engage with the story in such a intense way. But I do think that there was something around several stories that came up, was around the cancer person living with cancer as a victim. And what I mean by that is most of the women that I dealt, I'd say most of the women, not all of them women, they're all on a journey, but most of the women I dealt, was having a relationship with, and I still have a relationship with now, were really at different stages of their cancer journey. However, were really throwing back this idea of victim. We're really throwing back this narrative of survivor. And that's just that's their experience. It's not saying it's right or wrong, but there is the overarching sort of narrative in contemporary culture around cancer, and the narrative of like we're fighting a battle and those kind of things. And I myself have used that. You know, I've used that. Even like the word confront, I still grapple with that as we confront cancer. I find that difficult. But when I wrote it, I didn't find it difficult. So I'm on a journey as well, you know. And I say one of the women at the time was running away from it, meaning that running away from like having to deal with all these different narratives, and I would say that now is confronting it in a very different way, and that's because life's trajectory has opened many different portals for her to kind of deal with. I guess she would probably say, and I don't want to speak too much for her, but she would say she's in a place of acceptance, whereas before she was in a place of like fighting it, you know, and acceptance meaning like looking at life as a whole rather than it just being constricted into this thing that is very present for her, but there's more that she's exploring as well. I think I think the main story was throwing off this idea, and which is why they agreed to be in the film, that they didn't want to be portrayed as victims. They didn't want to be portrayed in sort of like, and they also didn't want to be portrayed as heroines. You know, they wanted to look at the sort of fragility of it all. I mean, they're dealing with fragility a lot. So you know, we are, and I'll say that with myself included, are dealing with fragility a lot. And so we're trying to look at and navigate what this all means, and it's messy and confusing and beautiful and strange all at the same time, and that is tied to our sense of sexual pleasure as well. It's all of those things, you know, because we're dealing with changed bodies and how we respond to these things, you know, and how we find different ways of pleasure, and also grieving a different. You know, grief was massive, you know, letting go of something, but that not being the defining thing. It's just like grief is powerful and you let go, and it's ongoing at times, but there's other journeys. And I think that we're all on different stages, but I say that that's a place that we connected on. And I'd say that came up in the poetry workshop a lot as well.
Amazing. And it's really exciting because also the bodies themselves are inconsistent within themselves. They change from day to day, to moment, from context to context. So it's really exciting to capture in some way this ever amorphous kind of population, that you captured them on a Thursday, and maybe the Friday the look would have been different, and maybe a year later they'll be different. And it's really exciting to think about capturing these moments, especially because we were talking before, the panel before was about what does it mean to make a solo show around an illness. And in some ways, the act of writing a show and producing a show and then touring that show in some ways freezes what the relationship to the body has to be, because it has to be consistent, because there has to be a script, and there has to be a lighting design that goes with it, and there has to be a poster image that goes with it, and there has to be a short description of it. But actually, 2 weeks later, you might decide, oh, I don't like that word confronting anymore. I don't want to use the word vulnerable. I prefer the word fragile. I want to use the word survivor. I don't want to use the word survivor. That's a really exciting process that to me has really linked people living with cancer with a lot of sexualized minorities, minority genders, people that are thinking in that ever-changing body, disabled bodies, that there is an exciting inconsistency to the life, which is that the body has to grow and change, and we do so kind of boldly instead of just adhering to a societal stopness of what the body is. Anyway, I don't know if there's any questions that are here that people would like to ask Lehni. I can happily talk to her for ages. Yes, up there. If you say the question, I could just repeat it also. It's, oh, yeah, we got a question coming on the mic. I appreciate it.
With mask. Yes, hello. Thank you very, very much for this wonderful short movie. I was very moved, and I think that these images will be with me for some time. My question is, what brought this issue of illness and age to you? You also mentioned in the beginning it was more about age and the aging body and desire of the aging body. What was the impulse to do this project, and what made you leave or move away from the topic of age and desire?
Thank you. That's a really great question. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So just to start, we haven't moved away from the topic of age and desire. It's definitely this. We feel like this film is a film on its own, and it has its own life. However, it is part of the process of the questions that we're asking as filmmakers. So if anyone wants to fund us, we can take funding for that. But anyway, I think what prompted me, or what inspired me to, or what led me to starting to tell this story on a personal level, is that I was dealing with my own recovery, ongoing living with cancer, but also I am dealing with being at this point. I think it's still the early stage of perimenopause, but it's also dealing with my body that is actually changing, and my sexual desire related to that is changing, and it's all kind of happened at the same time, converged at the similar time. My experience of cancer, my lived experience of cancer, has been probably for about 6 or 7 years now. We're 2022, yeah, 7 years now, and I'm also in my late almost a couple of years from 50. So it's also like that for me. I've started on the perimenopausal, and also the recognition of my body has changed from surgery and from radiotherapy and other forms of treatment, but also just it is changing. And so there was a big question for me. And then I started noticing that with most of my family, friends and women that I encounter, there has been the conversation around aging and sexual pleasure has been very topical in the last few years. And so at the same time, so Shona as well is a similar age to me, but hasn't lived with cancer or anything, but we started to have a conversation about that. And then another artist that we know had made a poem around being in their 50s and their relationship to sexual pleasure, and we found it hysterical and amazing. We wanted to do a project with them initially. So it all started off with this conversation around what are the conversations that we're having these days, and how do our life stories intersect with these conversations, and how do our bodies intersect, and so it started with that. And I think over the conversations we had with, what did I say, like 40 plus women in the inquiry, because we were like, this is our conversations we're having, but are other people having these conversations as well, or is it just us? And so we ended up having these conversations, and they were very rich, and I think we had more than 40 people apply for it, but in terms of timing, it was 40 people that could show up for the meetings. And these conversations, they felt like they wanted to have more of these conversations. So we knew that we would park the aging, I think partly because what was apparent is there was some at that time, the conversation around aging and sexual pleasure was also like having a lot of, at least in the UK, a lot of momentum. There was a lot of like well-known celebrities talking about menopause and aging and sexual pleasure. It started to be in sort of the popular culture here. which is great. It's great that we're having these conversations. However, we also felt in our research, the overarching, like the sort of immediate conversations were people who were living with illness. And I think that that was more immediate. And that was a call. I mean, as a person living with illness, but also as a call from what was coming in front of us. We were like, this is the question. This is a journey we're going to go on. And it doesn't preclude or leave out that other journey, but it just means that this is the immediate question, this immediate topic, this is immediate conversations that we're having. And also it was the most, at the time for both of us, it was the door we wanted to go through. It was the most interesting and compelling, because I think also the women we met, I mean, all the women were interesting and compelling, but they were like, it was a different dynamic in terms of the conversations we had in the spaces with them. And we felt like they wanted to have conversations more about this with us and with each other. So we said, let's make a film together.
Gorgeous. Gorgeous. We have 1 minute left. I don't know if there's anyone that has the most burningest of questions.
And thank you for that question, whoever that was, by the way.
Thank you for that. Or the most burningest of compliments to share about the film. Woo! 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 There, so just nice. Applause, applause, applause. Lehni, thank you so much for calling in. Thanks to the audience here for being with us today. Thank you for the tremendous film. Please thank Shona for us as well, for her tremendous work. Everyone can still see the film because it's featured on the Sex with Cancer website. And we're so thrilled, honored, and humbled to share it. So thank you so much to Kampnagel for welcoming Sex with Cancer as part of their weekend. Thank you, Lehni, for being here with us, and thank you to you. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Kampnagel, and thank you, Hamburg.
Yay!